The autumn rain hammered against the windows of Highgrove House as Queen Camilla stood in the grand drawing room, her fingers drumming impatiently against the mahogany side table. The afternoon had started pleasantly enough, with Princess Anne arriving for what was supposed to be a simple family tea. However, tensions had been brewing beneath the surface for months, and today they finally erupted. Anne had always been direct, sometimes brutally honest, and today was no exception. She questioned Camilla's recent decisions about royal patronages, particularly her choice to take on several charities that had previously been under Anne's care. The conversation grew heated as Anne accused Camilla of overstepping boundaries and trying to erase the legacy of previous royal women. Camilla's face flushed with anger as she listened to Anne's sharp words. She had worked tirelessly to earn her place in the royal family, enduring decades of public scrutiny and criticism. Now, even within the family, she felt under attack. The queen consort's patience finally snapped when Anne suggested that some responsibilities should return to working royals who had earned their stripes through years of dedicated service. Standing abruptly from her chair, Camilla's voice rose higher than usual. She reminded Anne of her own dedication and the challenges she had faced. The argument escalated quickly, with both women saying things they would later regret. Camilla felt cornered and defensive, while Anne remained stubbornly principled in her position. In a moment of heated emotion, Camilla made a decision that would haunt her for days to come. She asked Anne to leave immediately, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. Anne, equally angry but maintaining her characteristic dignity, gathered her coat and handbag without another word. The heavy oak front door slammed shut behind her with a resounding echo that seemed to shake the entire house. What Camilla didn't realize in her anger was that the electronic locks had engaged automatically due to a recent security upgrade. The new system, installed just weeks earlier, was designed to secure all entrances during certain weather conditions or security alerts. The torrential rain had triggered the emergency protocols, and now the doors could only be opened from the inside or with a special code that Anne didn't possess. Outside, Anne found herself trapped in the increasingly violent storm. The rain was coming down in sheets, driven by fierce winds that seemed to come from all directions. Her usual driver had been dismissed earlier when she mentioned staying for tea, and she had planned to call for transportation later. Now, stranded without immediate help, she sought shelter under the small portico at the front entrance, but it provided little protection from the driving rain. Minutes passed, then an hour, as Anne stood shivering in her now soaked clothes. Her phone had no signal in this part of the countryside, and the intercom system at the gate wasn't responding. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. The Princess Royal, known for her no-nonsense approach and dedication to duty, was locked out of her brother's home like a common visitor. Inside the house, Camilla paced the drawing room, her initial anger slowly giving way to unease. She had expected Anne to simply drive away, perhaps with a dramatic exit that would give them both time to cool down. The queen consort tried to focus on her correspondence, but found herself glancing toward the windows repeatedly. The storm outside was growing fiercer, and something nagged at her conscience. The staff, sensing the tension in the household, kept their distance. They had witnessed royal disagreements before and knew better than to interfere unless directly asked. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, busied herself with evening preparations, while the security team monitored their screens from the main office, unaware that anything was amiss with the front entrance. Meanwhile, King Charles was en route from London, delayed by the very same storm that was now tormenting his sister. His driver navigated carefully through the flooded country roads, windshield wipers working furiously against the relentless downpour. Charles had no idea of the drama unfolding at his home, having left early that morning for a series of meetings at Buckingham Palace. The king had been looking forward to a quiet evening with his wife and sister. He valued these family moments, especially given the demanding nature of his royal duties. In his mind, he was already picturing the three of them sitting by the fireplace, perhaps playing cards or simply enjoying each other's company as the storm raged outside. Anne, meanwhile, had moved to different positions around the entrance, trying to find better shelter. Her practical nature kicked in as she assessed her options. The princess had faced challenging situations before during her royal duties and travels. But this felt different, more personal, and somehow more humiliating. She was not one to give up easily, But the rain was soaking through her wool coat, and the cold was beginning to affect her seriously. As darkness began to fall, the automatic exterior lights illuminated the front of the house, casting long shadows across the driveway. Anne could see the warm glow emanating from the windows of the drawing room where she knew Camilla was likely still fuming about their argument. The sight stirred a mixture of emotions in her: frustration, sadness, and a growing concern about the rift this incident might create within the family. Inside, Camilla finally decided to check on Anne's departure. She moved to the front windows and peered out into the darkness, expecting to see an empty driveway. Instead, she was shocked to see a figure huddled near the front door. Her heart sank as she realized what had happened. The anger that had consumed her earlier evaporated instantly, replaced by horror and regret. Rushing to the front door, Camilla frantically worked to disengage the security system. Her hands shook as she entered the code, desperate to correct her terrible mistake. The rain had intensified even further, and she could see Anne's obvious distress even from inside the house. The queen consort's mind raced with the implications of what had occurred and how she could possibly make amends for such a serious oversight. The electronic locks finally disengaged with a soft clicking sound, and Camilla pulled open the heavy door. Anne stood there, completely drenched and shivering, her usually perfect hair plastered to her head and her designer clothes ruined by the relentless rain. Water dripped from every part of her clothing, forming small puddles on the stone steps. Her face was pale, and her lips had taken on a slight blue tinge from the cold. Camilla gasped in shock, her hand flying to her mouth as the full reality of what had happened hit her. Without hesitation, she reached out to help Anne inside, but the princess stepped back slightly, maintaining her dignity even in her bedraggled state. The two women stood there for a moment in awkward silence, the sound of rain and wind filling the space between them. Anne's voice was quiet but steady when she finally spoke, though Camilla could hear the exhaustion and hurt beneath her controlled tone. She explained that she had been trying to leave for over an hour but couldn't get past the front gate or reach anyone on her phone. The security system had apparently malfunctioned, trapping her outside in the worst storm the region had seen in months. Rushing into action, Camilla guided Anne toward the nearest bathroom, calling for Mrs. Henderson to bring towels and blankets immediately. The staff responded quickly, their professional training taking over as they worked to help their unexpected guest. Hot tea was ordered from the kitchen, and a warm bath was drawn while Anne's soaked clothing was carefully removed for cleaning and drying. The queen consort paced anxiously outside the bathroom door, her mind filled with guilt and worry. She knew that Anne's health could be seriously affected by prolonged exposure to such cold and wet conditions. The princess was known for her robust constitution and active lifestyle, but she was also in her 70s and had been outside for far too long in dangerous weather conditions. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bathroom with Anne's wet clothes and whispered to Camilla that the princess was warming up but still shivering badly. Clean, dry clothes had been found from Camilla's wardrobe. Not a perfect fit, but adequate for the situation. The housekeeper's concerned expression reflected the seriousness of what had occurred, though she was too professional to voice any criticism of her employer's actions. Inside the bathroom, Anne sat in the warm bath, finally allowing herself to process what had happened. The physical relief of being warm and dry again was overshadowed by the emotional impact of the afternoon's events. She had felt abandoned and forgotten by someone who was supposed to be family, left to suffer in conditions that could have been genuinely dangerous. When Anne finally emerged, dressed in borrowed clothes that hung awkwardly on her frame, she found Camilla waiting in the hallway with obvious anxiety written across her face. The queen consort immediately began apologizing profusely, explaining that she had no idea about the new security system's automatic locks, and that she never intended for Anne to be trapped outside. Anne listened politely but remained distant, her usual warmth replaced by a cool formality that spoke volumes about her feelings. She accepted the offered hot tea and warm clothes with grace, but her responses to Camilla's attempts at conversation were brief and carefully measured. The emotional walls she had built to protect herself were now firmly in place. The two women sat in the drawing room where their argument had begun, but now the atmosphere was entirely different. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth, providing a stark contrast to the storm still raging outside. Camilla kept glancing at Anne, searching for signs of forgiveness or at least understanding, but found only polite distance in return. Anne's phone finally regained signal, and she quietly arranged for her driver to collect her as soon as the roads were safe. She declined Camilla's repeated offers to stay for dinner, or even overnight, maintaining that she preferred to return to her own home. Every suggestion was met with the same polite but firm refusal, creating an uncomfortable tension in the room. Meanwhile, Charles continued his slow journey through the flooded countryside, completely unaware of the crisis that had unfolded at his home. His driver navigated carefully around fallen branches and standing water, making frequent stops to assess road conditions. What should have been a 2-hour drive had already stretched to nearly 4 hours, with no end in sight. Back at Highgrove, Camilla found herself in the uncomfortable position of trying to make conversation with someone who clearly wanted minimal interaction. She attempted to address their earlier argument, hoping to find some common ground, or at least explain her position more clearly. However, Anne's responses remained courteous but distant, as if she were speaking to a stranger, rather than family. The princess checked her watch frequently, obviously eager for her driver's arrival. Each time Camilla tried to bring up the incident, or offer another apology, Anne would redirect the conversation to neutral topics like the weather or upcoming royal engagements. Her professional training in diplomatic conversation served her well, but it also created an impenetrable barrier to any real communication. As the evening wore on, Anne's physical condition improved, but the emotional damage seemed to deepen. She sat rigidly in her chair, occasionally glancing toward the windows as if calculating how much longer she would need to remain in this uncomfortable situation. The borrowed clothes were a constant reminder of her vulnerability and dependence on Camilla's hospitality. Camilla grew increasingly desperate to repair the damage, but every attempt seemed to make things worse. Her apologies began to sound hollow and repetitive, while Anne's responses became even more formal and distant. The queen consort realized that she was dealing with consequences far beyond a simple argument. She had crossed a line that might not be easily forgotten or forgiven. The staff moved quietly around the house, completing their evening duties while remaining acutely aware of the tension between the two royal women. They had seen family disagreements before, but this felt different, more serious, and potentially damaging to relationships that were crucial to the functioning of the royal household. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger, with wind gusts that rattled the windows and rain that drummed against the roof with increasing intensity. The weather seemed to mirror the emotional climate inside the house, where two proud women sat in uncomfortable silence, each waiting for something to change, but unwilling to take the first step toward reconciliation. The distinctive sound of Charles's official car finally crunched on the gravel driveway around 8:30 in the evening. Both women looked toward the windows as headlights swept across the drawing room, bringing with them a sense of relief mixed with apprehension. Camilla felt a surge of hope that Charles might help resolve the terrible situation, while Anne wondered how much she should reveal about the afternoon's events. Charles entered the house with his usual energy, shaking rainwater from his coat and calling out cheerful greetings. His voice echoed through the hallway as he spoke to the staff, completely unaware of the tension that had dominated the house for hours. When he appeared in the drawing room doorway, his smile faded immediately as he took in the scene before him. Anne sat stiffly in an armchair wearing clothes that were obviously not her own, her hair still showing signs of her ordeal despite careful attempts to restore it. Camilla hovered nearby with an expression of barely contained anxiety, her hands clasped tightly together. The atmosphere in the room was so thick with unspoken tension that Charles could sense something was seriously wrong before anyone said a word. The king's trained eye quickly assessed the situation, noting Anne's borrowed clothing and the uncomfortable distance between the two women. His experience in reading people and situations, honed through decades of royal duties, told him that whatever had happened was significant. He moved into the room slowly, his natural diplomatic instincts taking over as he tried to gauge the best approach. Camilla immediately began explaining the afternoon's events, her words tumbling over each other in her eagerness to present her version of what had occurred. She described the argument, Anne's departure, and then the horrible discovery that the new security system had trapped the princess outside. Her voice became higher and more strained as she tried to convey both her regret and her innocence regarding the technical malfunction. Charles listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When Camilla mentioned that Anne had been outside for over an hour in the storm, his face paled noticeably. He turned to his sister, searching her face for confirmation and signs of how she was handling the situation. What he saw there concerned him greatly. Anne's usual warmth and directness had been replaced by a cold formality that he recognized as her way of protecting herself when deeply hurt. Anne's account was much more restrained, delivered in the measured tones of someone who had already processed their emotions and reached their own conclusions. She confirmed the basic facts without elaboration, mentioning the argument, her attempt to leave, and her extended wait outside. However, her delivery was so controlled and diplomatic that Charles understood immediately how much effort she was putting into maintaining her composure. The king found himself in an impossible position, caught between his wife and his sister in a situation where both women had legitimate grievances. He could see that Camilla was genuinely distraught about what had happened, but he also understood that Anne felt betrayed and abandoned in a way that went far beyond a simple misunderstanding. The technical failure of the security system was unfortunate, but it had occurred in the context of a heated argument and immediate dismissal. Charles attempted to lighten the mood by suggesting they all have dinner together and discuss the matter more calmly. However, Anne politely but firmly declined, explaining that her driver would arrive shortly and that she preferred to return home. Her refusal was delivered with such finality that both Charles and Camilla understood that further persuasion would be unwelcome and potentially counterproductive. As if summoned by Anne's words, her driver called to announce his arrival at the front gates. The princess stood immediately, clearly relieved that her ordeal was finally coming to an end. She moved toward the door with careful dignity, accepting Charles's concerned offers of help but declining any further assistance from Camilla. The queen consort watched helplessly as Anne prepared to leave, knowing that this departure was very different from the angry exit that had started the whole disaster. Charles walked his sister to the door, speaking quietly with her about her health and well-being. He could see that she was physically recovered from her exposure to the storm, but the emotional impact was clearly significant. Anne assured him that she was fine, but her tone suggested that fine was a relative term under the circumstances. She promised to call him the following day, but there was something formal in her manner that hadn't been there that morning. The goodbye between Anne and Camilla was painfully awkward, conducted with the sort of polite distance usually reserved for diplomatic encounters with foreign dignitaries. Anne thanked Camilla for the dry clothes and medical attention with perfect courtesy, but there was no warmth or forgiveness in her words. Camilla's final apology was acknowledged with a slight nod, but it was clear that mere words would not be enough to repair the damage. After Anne's departure, Charles returned to the drawing room to find Camilla in tears. The full weight of what had happened was finally hitting her as she realized that her moment of anger had created a serious rift within the royal family. She had always worked hard to build relationships with Charles's children and siblings, understanding how important family unity was to the monarchy's public image and private happiness. Charles listened as his wife broke down completely, admitting that she felt like she had failed not just Anne but the entire family. The pressure of her role as queen consort, combined with the ongoing challenges of public scrutiny and family dynamics, had finally overwhelmed her usual composure. She feared that Anne would never forgive her, and that this incident would create lasting divisions within the family. The king found himself in the difficult position of comforting his wife, while also grappling with his own concerns about his sister's well-being and the potential long-term consequences of the afternoon's events. He understood both women's perspectives and could see how a series of unfortunate circumstances had escalated into something much more serious than anyone had intended. Over the following days, Charles worked quietly to assess the damage and begin the delicate process of healing. He spoke with Anne daily, monitoring her health and emotional state, while carefully avoiding any pressure to reconcile immediately. He also supported Camilla through her guilt and regret, helping her understand that while the situation was serious, it was not necessarily irreparable. The incident became a turning point for all three royals, forcing them to examine their relationships, communication patterns, and the pressures they faced as public figures trying to maintain private family bonds. Anne's forgiveness, when it eventually came, was hard-won and conditional, requiring genuine change and understanding from both Charles and Camilla. The new security system was immediately reviewed and modified to prevent similar incidents. But the real work lay in rebuilding trust and communication within the family. It would take months of careful effort, genuine apologies, and demonstrated commitment to change before the relationship between Anne and Camilla could begin to heal. Some wounds, they learned, require more than time to mend. They require genuine understanding, respect, and a willingness to see beyond one's own perspective, to understand the pain of others.